views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
I'm worried that we don't get a handle on it, but my hopes are that we do get a handle on it.
Tonight on Politics Now, FEMA in Las Vegas, how teams are trying to help reverse a spike in COVID cases here. Plus,
we find that that's actually got widespread support.
We talk politics with Anthony Salvanto from CBS News. New polling on election reform, coronavirus, and the economy.
And I get a call saying, your dad is dead.
Turning heartbreak into action, Congressman Stephen Horsford tells us how his own father's murder is behind a bill meant to help break the cycle of violence.
From 8 News Now, this is Politics Now.
Thank you for joining us. Masks are back, and so is a renewed push to get vaccinations into arms. Right now, crews from FEMA are in Las Vegas going door to door to help combat our rise in COVID-19 cases. Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra was here to highlight the effort. Joe Moeller shows us what they're doing.
More than 99% of those who are dying today from COVID are unvaccinated.
Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, Xavier Becerra, and Governor Steve Sisolak joined forces to address the recent rise in COVID-19 cases in southern Nevada.
Those variants are going to keep coming if we don't get ahead of this.
Thursday, Becerra shared how the federal government is here to help. FEMA has sent surge response teams. They are canvassing certain hard-hit zip codes throughout Las Vegas to pass out vaccination information.
Thank you for doing this, for going out there and touching people where you need to find them, because sometimes they can't come to us.
He says these teams are here at Sisolak's request.
And they're focusing on the areas in particular that have extremely low vaccination rates, and that's where they're going. And we're putting up pop-ups and then sending the surge teams in to help with that.
The surge teams are being sent to a number of cities experiencing spikes. Sisolak and Becerra visited a pop-up clinic at the Sherman Gardens Community Center. Both say getting more people vaccinated at clinics like this will help combat the rise in cases and hospitalizations we are experiencing.
Well, I'm worried that we don't get a handle on it, but my hopes are that we do get a handle on it. Right now, we're, like I say, having the surge teams here, FEMA on the ground is definitely making a big difference.
Joe Moeller, 8 News Now.
The workplace mask mandate here in Clark County is in place until at least August 17th, and then Clark County will reassess. Now, we often talk about vaccination rates here in Nevada as a whole, but we decided this evening to take a look at how other counties across Nevada are doing with vaccinations. Clark County is at about 40% fully vaccinated. Washoe County up north in Reno, 56.5% of the population is vaccinated. Story County is the lowest. On Friday, just 11.7% of that population was vaccinated. White Pine County is at 38% for an example, and next door in Nye County, the vaccination rate is 33.6%. The federal eviction moratorium ends in a week. Local shelters are preparing for a tsunami of people that will need assistance. The Centers for Disease Control says there will not be another extension of the moratorium. So now local organizations are building up their services to try and meet the anticipated demand. Both the Salvation Army and Catholic Charities of Southern Nevada are adding more case managers. They're encouraging people to reach out for assistance because for many of them, this will be their first time without a home.
I know it's difficult when somebody doesn't know what to do. Like now you're faced with this, you know, and you feel like you have to solve it. It's just reach out and then we'll see what we can do.
The Clark County Cares Housing Assistance Program, also known as CHAP, recently received more funding, and it's now accepting new applications for rent and utilities assistance. There are currently about 2,000 beds for homeless people in Southern Nevada. About 6,000 people are homeless. Many of the debates across the country right now are centering on election reform and how elections should look. CBS News recently did a lot of polling on how people feel about election laws. So I spoke with the Survey and Elections Director from CBS News, Anthony Salvanto, and we discussed that. A lot to digest right now with regards to voting changes and laws, not only here in Nevada, but nationwide. And joining us to talk about that and other topics that are happening right now, the CBS News Director of Election and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto. Anthony, thank you for joining us to talk about breakdown a lot of numbers and kind of what the public is seeing with regards to some of the changes at a local level. Let's talk about the changes for elections. Most Americans They're for expanding access to voting, early voting. They think it might make it easier. Possibly that's more of a Democratic way of thinking. What are some of the numbers that you've seen showing about that opinion, about that process?
Hey, John, and great to talk to you. So the first big thing for context is coming out of 2020, you'll recall a lot of states put into place some changes to ostensibly make voting more convenient, a little bit easier for people, obviously in the middle of a pandemic, and we saw a record turnout. So one of the things we found when we asked people about this, including a large segment, not just our poll, but of validated voters, people we know actually did go out and vote in 2020, is that a majority say that those changes ought to be kept in place, that those conveniences that we saw added last year. So we get big numbers for that. And the other thing I will add for you, John, is that in general, in principle, we find more people saying that the voting process as it is ought to either be easier or kept as it is. Both of those numbers outweigh the people who say that voting should in principle be harder. And finally, those folks who do say it should be harder, there you do see a bigger partisan split. You see a lot of Republicans, a lot of voters who supported former President Trump in 2020 really dominate among the ranks of those who say it should be harder, John.
So that's on a broader scale. It seems like, according to this polling, more people want easier access to be able to take part in elections. We mentioned some of the laws that are being passed across the country right now. What is actually in those measures, limiting early voting, for example, things along those lines, and what does the public think about that?
Yeah, so a couple of things, John. One is that we want to look at, first of all, who people think would be helped or impacted by the changes in these laws as the people see it. So the first thing is, if you ask Republicans what happens if voting gets easier, a lot of them, majority of them, say they think it'll help Democrats win. So you see the politics in play here. And then if you go and you ask Democrats what happens if voting gets harder, a majority of Democrats think that will help Republicans win. So to some extent, the partisans, rank and file partisans, have absorbed their party's messages on this, and to some extent, they see politics in play about who gets advantaged and who doesn't. Now, let me add some specifics to this about things like favoring voter ID. In our new polling, we find that that's actually got widespread support, and that it's not just Democrats and Republicans who favor that in principle, but it also goes across white voters, black voters, Hispanic voters, all with large majorities saying they would favor the idea of voter ID. The other thing to add, John, is that there is a lot of talk about mail balloting, about whether or not all voters ought to be sent a ballot, whether mail voting works or not. And there we do see more partisan splits, where Republicans have been more suspicious or critical of mail balloting. And that we see directly coming from the fact that, A, many more Republicans voted in person than Democrats who used more mail ballots in 2020.
Republicans think that more voter access is damaging to their point of view, whereas Democrats think it's beneficial. How much is that perception versus actual reality? And I don't know if there's a way to gauge that necessarily, but on the ground, is that true?
The reality, John, is that there is not a strong association between places where turnout goes up and which party necessarily does better. You can find counties, and you can certainly find states, where turnout went up and former President Trump or Republicans in general did better. And you can find places where turnout went up and Democrats did better. And you can also find the reverse in places, there weren't many, where turnout went down. So it's a loose association at best. And the other thing I would add, just for context, is that when we look at turnout going up and down, we often equate that with, is voting easier or is it harder? It's not necessarily the case. It is often the case, and academic studies and scholarly studies have often shown, that to a large extent there are other factors. There's excitement about an election. There's whether people have voted in the past. Voting becomes a habit. All that go into that turnout equation. So this is one piece of the puzzle, but it's not all of the pieces, and so that actual voting process may have some effect, but it's not necessarily the dominant one, John.
Anthony, I think they say all politics is local to some extent. What is the perception of President Biden's handle of the economy? What his administration is doing to get through the pandemic?
So the president gets overall positive approval numbers for handling the economy, not as high as he gets for handling the pandemic, but nonetheless positive. People say their personal finances, a majority of people say that they're good, but there are real concerns, notably inflation. We ask people if the price you pay for things is going up, and in fact, large majorities, 80% saying the price of gasoline has gone up for them, nearly as many saying the price of groceries has gone up for them, electricity and power as well. So that's one lingering concern there about the economy. And the other thing is, if you talk about spending, you ask about government spending, there is large support in principle for a lot of these infrastructure ideas, building and repairing roads and bridges, for example. Now, this becomes a little more partisan when you attach President Biden's name to it. That drops support a little bit among Republicans. But in principle, the idea of infrastructure remains very popular, John.
And we'll see how those measures work their way through Capitol Hill. That is an ongoing process. Anthony Salvanto from CBS News, thanks for breaking down the numbers for us. We appreciate it, and we'll see you again soon. Let's talk more numbers. A poll released by Governor Steve Sisolak's campaign shows most Nevadans still have a positive image of him and Senator Catherine Cortez Masto. Both Democrats are up for re-election next year. So let's look at Sisolak first. And again, we'll point out this is from the Sisolak team. 78% of Democrats viewed him somewhat or very favorably. Independents viewed favorably by 16 percentage points. However, only 30% of Republicans had a favorable view of the governor. 59% also viewed his handling of the coronavirus favorably. This poll was done by OH Predictive Insights. 538's pollster rankings gave them A, B, or C grades with a slight Republican bias. Former Metro Police Undersheriff Kevin McMahill says he now wants the top job. This week, he announced he's running for Clark County Sheriff. McMahill is already endorsed by current sheriff and gubernatorial candidate Joe Lombardo. McMahill retired from Metro back in December after 30 years with the department. Former assistant sheriff and current state assemblyman Tom Roberts has also told 8 News Now he's running for the top job. Next on Politics Now, dealing with gun violence.
Now, my job is to try to give somebody else an opportunity he didn't have.
Congressman Stephen Horsford talking about the murder of his father and how it helped inspire a bill that he has right now in Congress.
Welcome back to Politics Now.
Democratic Congressman Stephen Horsford is using his own story to push for a bill to tackle gun violence. His father was murdered nearly 3 decades ago. Now the congressman hopes a new piece of legislation will prevent other families from experiencing similar trauma. In an exclusive interview, he tells his story to the I-Team's David Charnes.
Someone chose violence and took his life. That doesn't have to be.
It's a moment Congressman Stephen Horsford says made him passionate for change.
We're talking about breaking the cycle of violence so that no one has to experience it.
A cycle of violence that's affected his own family, starting when he was 19.
It was trauma for all of us, for our entire family. You know, I've again tried to turn that pain into a sense of purpose.
In 1992, a gunman shot and killed Horsford's father at this North Las Vegas convenience store.
Your dad is dead. Okay, what am I supposed to do with that? That's 28 years ago. I am now in a position where I can do something about that.
He's introduced the Break the Cycle of Violence Act, which creates community-based intervention programs.
You don't give them anything else to do. What do you want them to do?
Targeting young people at risk. Teenagers like Sean Jerion Coleman.
I feel like if you get shot in the face and you don't change, then what are you doing?
Coleman survived a shooting 2 years ago. Now he too is turning that scar into newfound self-confidence.
It's a chance to be the change you want to see. That's what I always say.
He's the president of an advisory council here at Nevada Partners.
I was on the streets at 16, 17, so it's kind of like being in the streets, you know. You just learn, you either adapt or you die. This is a poem for Breonna Taylor I wrote. We fought long and hard in protest and campaign to get your killers arraigned.
But he's adapted in a different way.
It's hard to explain why another innocent black individual has to be slain.
Taking up poetry writing a new chapter, one in his life and other lives too.
They plug you into programs and they set you up with people that could really help you move into a path where you want to go.
I didn't have the opportunity for my dad to see me graduate from college, for him to see me get married, for my 3 kids to have the chance to meet their grandfather.
For the congressman, it's about investing in another way to reduce crime and to prevent one's potential from being stolen.
My job is to try to give somebody else an opportunity. He didn't have a trauma that I experienced, that my family experienced, that too many family members throughout Southern Nevada. And I never want my community to be labeled as violent.
Democratic Congresswoman Dina Titus is a co-sponsor of the bill, as are 48 other members of Congress, all of them Democrats. Right now, the bill is making its way through 2 congressional committees. I'm David Charnes, 8 News Now.
A recent government report finds gun violence costs our country more than $200 billion a year, about $700 for every American. Now, as David mentioned, no Republicans have signed on to this proposal. We did reach out to the National Republican Party for a comment, but they declined. Next on Politics Now, Las Vegas trying to woo the Oakland A's. But where would a baseball stadium go in the Valley? Ron Futrell breaks down some possible locations. And we hear from the head of Clark County School District as class approaches on Politics Now.
You're watching Politics Now.
The Clark County School District has close to $1 billion in federal funding to spend. Well, I spoke with Superintendent Dr. Jesus Jara this week about how he wants to use the money for CCSD. We also spoke about other issues in the district. This time last year, there was a bit of a divide that had developed between CCSD and the state and Governor Sisolak with regards to distance learning. Everyone was kind of scrambling to try and make things happen at the school education level. What confidence do you have from the state that they are behind what CCSD plans to do when it comes not only to federal funding, we'll get to that, but also just when it comes to getting kids in class safely?
Well, we've been working with the state, since we closed. We, opened schools in March. The State Department, the governor's office, the Department of Education worked closely to open up in March. They saw the priority we had. Our kids were struggling at home. Our adults were struggling. Everybody was. So we came together March 1, opened schools in our pre-K, opened for our secondary schools in a hybrid model. So they're very supportive. We submitted our plan to the state July 8th that the board just approved, and they're in line to where we are.
So things have improved.
Absolutely. Our relationship has gotten a lot better, and I believe in where we're all headed together.
Where do you think the most need is right now?
Well, right now, from what we saw, obviously I've been very vocal about the mental health of our students and our staff. Technology, if we're going to continue moving forward, and the investment that we've already made, our digital learning, and it's not giving just a kid a computer, it's how are we teaching and learning. So we have those 2 are our priorities, and obviously accelerating the learning. Our students, we don't know how far we fell academically, and for us, bringing our kids back in front of our teachers where they belong is accelerating learning. That's a number 3 priority for us.
All right, we go from school to sports. Officials from the Oakland A's have been looking in Las Vegas at possible locations for a ballpark if the A's relocate here to Southern Nevada. Sports anchor Ron Futrell takes a look at some of the possible spots for the A's here in Las Vegas.
We've got a lot of empty spaces here in the Valley where a ballpark could work. 30 acres would be a tight fit. 60 acres would be plenty of room for a ballpark and plenty of parking for locals, and that's important, by the way. We'll show you a few general spots that are being looked at. First of all, let's take a look at, in North Las Vegas, up there across from the Speedway at I-15. A lot of BLM land up there. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Also near the VA hospital is another possible site to look at. Way in the south part of the valley, all the way out near the M Casino. A lot of land out there where they could possibly find a place to be able to put a ballpark. By the Thomas and Mack Center near the airport is another location that we understand the A's are looking at, Paradise and Tropicana. And then finally, the Rock and Rio site. Okay, this is at Sahara and Las Vegas Boulevard South, right across from the Sahara Hotel. Another spot that they are looking at, we understand right now. But that North Las Vegas location, a couple of locations out there, Mayor John Lee would like to make that happen.
50% of North Las Vegas hasn't been built out yet. We have a lot of land. I've got a piece of property, 450 acres right now, that is a development zone that we could put together. Across the street from VA Hospital, I have 135 acres. We could take that big 450, we could put the stadium on it, we could put the practice fields on it, and we could put the executive offices on it. One-stop shop for the A's.
Yeah, well, the A's and Las Vegas have a great relationship. They've played regular season games and exhibition games here in town. The Aviators, of course, are the AAA affiliate for the Oakland A, so they certainly like Las Vegas. A's management, they're in town, making at least their 4th trip to Las Vegas today and tomorrow, talking about how to make this work if it can. There are a lot of moving parts. Finding the right location is just one part of it.
So far, government officials say they don't want to spend any public money on a new ballpark, but if the A's put some pressure in for public funding, there will have to be at least one special session this year to deal with redistricting. They could discuss it.
You're watching Politics Now.
Here in Politics Now, a friendly reminder that we are collecting school supplies as part of our annual Great School Supply Drive. It's pretty simple. If you donate, just drop off your school supplies at any Smith's location around Southern Nevada through July 29th. That is next Thursday. All supplies go to the Public Education Foundation's Teacher Exchange Program. Help out if you can. School has politics too. Thank you very much for watching Politics Now. You can stay up to date online at 8newsnow.com. And don't forget, you can watch us every Saturday right here on 8 News Now. Thank you for watching. Have a good week.